All right, let's take a look at the Atlanta Falcons and see what did they do during the 2018 offseason to try and improve their roster from last season. Now, keep in mind that last year they had a decent season. They made the playoffs. They beat the Rams in the first round of the playoffs, but fell just short against the Philadelphia Eagles in the second round of the playoffs. And the Eagles went on to win the Super Bowl. So the Falcons already had an extremely strong team. And of course, the year before, tragically for us Falcons fans, we were destroying the New England Patriots 28-3. I know, it hurts me more than it even hurts you, I promise. But that's what happened. But the point is this. The Falcons have had a very, very strong team for the last 2 seasons. We're winning the Super Bowl until the end of the fourth quarter. That was brutal. Then, lost to the Eagles, eventual Super Bowl champions, in the second round of the playoffs last season. What did they do to try to finally bring home the first Super Bowl to Atlanta? Let's see what they did. First, let's look at their cap situation. Shockingly, they actually have more cap space right now than they did at the beginning of the preseason. That's because they cut a few guys, and we'll talk about that in a minute, the guys that I thought were at risk of being cut. But in addition to that, they signed Matt Ryan to an extension. They signed Ricardo Allen recently to an extension. They signed Jake Matthews to an extension. So it's actually pretty amazing that they have $18 million in cap space when they started the preseason with only $13 million. Let's see what happened. Well, first, let's look at those guys that I thought at the beginning of the preseason might get cut. Not all of them did, but these are the guys that I thought might get cut. First of all, Andy Levitre, I thought, was definitely at risk of getting cut. He was a guard, starting guard last season. Didn't play as well as he had the year before. Also was a little banged up. But mostly it would have saved $7 million by cutting him. Instead, what the Falcons did is they restructured the deal and lowered his salary, but kept him on the roster. Levine Toilolo was another guy that I thought might get cut, and who did. He was primarily a blocking tight end, not a big receiving threat, and he saved $2.5 million. The Falcons saved $2.5 million by letting him go. Brooks Reed was another guy that I thought was at risk of getting cut. He had a good year last year. Look, Brooks Reed had a really rough first couple of seasons in Atlanta. You can see, look at how the numbers dropped off. He had 56 tackles in 2013 with the Texans, then 41 tackles, then boom, drops off to 17, and then 25 in 2016. But he had a really good year last season. He sets the edge. He's strong against the run. He even had 4 sacks last season. I just thought Brooks Reed was at risk because he has a fairly high salary. But it looks like he will probably be back as of this point for 2018, which is good. Honestly, the Falcons need him for depth purposes. And like I said, he's very, very strong against the run. So it's good that Brooks Reed will be back. Now let's look at the free agents. Who were the unrestricted free agents that the Falcons had on offense? Taylor Gabriel was one of the biggest free agents on the offense. He had a huge 2016 season under Kyle Shanahan. 579 yards and 6 touchdowns. Just amazing. They'd throw him a screen pass and boom, he'd go for 50 yards for a touchdown. So he had 6 touchdowns. Very, very strong year that year. Last year, slowed down, had a similar number of catches. He had 33, but his yards per catch dropped significantly. And so, I don't know if Steve Sarkisian just didn't use him right, or maybe teams started to kind of figure out what was, what he was doing well at and managed to defend better against it. But he played last year on a second-round tender worth $2.7 million. I knew the Falcons probably weren't going to be able to keep him, but man, I was shocked that the Bears gave him 4 years and $26 million. Definitely do not blame the Falcons for letting him walk. And they brought in another receiver, as most Falcons fans know, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but I feel good about the receiver room, okay, in Atlanta. Andre Roberts was another guy who will not be back. He was a free agent. He mainly served as a returner, didn't have a lot of numbers on offense. Last year, he had a one-year, $1.8 million deal, and he signed a one-year deal to go play for the Jets. Now, on defense, who were the guys? Because the Falcons just didn't have a lot of key players that were up for free agency. On defense, Adrian Claiborne, that was the biggest name free agent on their roster. That's unrestricted free agent. He had a 2-year deal that was worth $4.25 million per year, and he was value for that. He proved to be great value. He had 22 tackles in 2016, 21 tackles last season. He had 9.5 sacks last year, but that's highly misleading because all Falcons fans remember that Cowboy game when the the Cowboys starting left tackle was out, and Claiborne just tore that guy up, and he had 5 sacks in that one game. So a little bit misleading there with the 9.5 sacks, but even if he had 4.5, 5.5 sacks, those are really strong numbers for a guy that was making $4.25 million. He was a strong starting defensive end. He's a former first-round pick for Tampa Bay. He's turning 30. He turned 30 this summer, and the Patriots gave him 2 years and $10 million. Now, defensive ends, they can play into their early 30s, but you should suspect that he's not going to play better next season than he did last season. So for him to get a raise, actually, with the Patriots, the Patriots really needed to improve their pass rush, and I guess they thought this was their best chance of doing it. It'll be interesting. I have nothing but good things to say about Adrian Claiborne. I wish him the best there in New England, but I don't blame the Falcons for letting him walk, especially when they drafted a defensive end in the first round last season who is expected to be extremely, extremely big this year. Supposed to have a huge year. So can't blame the Falcons for letting Claiborne walk. Now, Dontari Poe is a more interesting case. He played well last year. He had a 1-year, $8 million deal. You can see the first couple of years that he played with the Chiefs, he had just huge numbers. 51 tackles, 4.5 sacks, 46 tackles, 6 sacks. For an interior player to get that kind of pass rush, that's special. But then he struggled with some back issues. He had some herniated discs, and just hasn't been the same in terms of being able to generate pass rush from the inside. Still strong against the run, but is he really worth $8 million? Doesn't seem so. But the Panthers wanted to replace Star Lotulelei, and so they gave Dontari Poe 3 years and $28 million. Very, very interesting. I think Lotulelei got like 5 years and $50 million from the Buffalo Bills. So, but it's still like about $10 million a year. They got Dontari Poe for 3 years and $28 million. It'll be interesting to see how that works out. But Poe is very, very strong against the run. It'll be a good addition next to Quan Short there in Carolina. but he won't be back in Atlanta, and that's a big loss. Honestly, it's an even bigger loss than losing Adrian Claiborne in my eyes. Now at defensive tackle, they had a couple of other free agents. Courtney Upshaw, very interesting story. He used to be a linebacker for the Ravens, and then DQ Dan Quinn converted him into a defensive tackle. Not a lot of guys in the NFL who can say that. But he was a solid reserve player who played well in very limited snaps, and he'd gotten a 1-year, $1.5 million deal. But he won't be back. I think the Jets or somebody signed him. But he won't be back with Atlanta. Atiba Rubin, that's another guy that, it'd be interesting to see how he does. He'll be 32 next season. He was a backup last year, had 15 tackles in 10 games. He was really good earlier, when he was younger, playing for the Browns. He was playing last year on a $900,000 deal. Oakland brought him in and gave him a $1 million deal, but there's some stiff competition there in Oakland at defensive tackle. So not 100% sure he'll make the roster, but I don't know. Atiba Rubin, the Falcons lost 3 defensive tackles. A starter in Dontari Poe and 2 reserve players. They have a couple guys coming back from injury. They have 1 guy coming back from injury. So we will see. I'm a little nervous about defensive tackle, to be honest with you. At linebacker, Kamal Ishmael, they decided to bring him back. Originally was a safety, as most Falcons fans know, but played well as a backup linebacker. They gave him a 1-year, $2 million deal last season. He's really kind of a tweener, You play him at linebacker. He's a big hitter, but he's not that big. He's a little small, 206 pounds for a linebacker, but he's also not great in coverage. So he's an interesting player, but he's a solid tackler. And the Falcons decided to bring him back. I like Ishmael, so I'm glad to see that. Leroy Reynolds is another guy who was a linebacker, reserve linebacker last season. Had 7 tackles in 9 games, so didn't, play a lot. He played on a 1-year, $1.3 million deal, and he signed with Philadelphia. All right, let's look at all of the changes, the key changes that happened on the Falcons roster from last season to this season. Well, first of all, Teron Ward out as the number 3 running back. He had decent average yards per carry, 4.2 yards per carry last year, but he only averaged about 125 yards per season the last 3 years. So, I don't know how much he wanted, but I guess the Falcons decided they could just go pick up somebody in the middle rounds and easily replace him. So they got Ito Smith in the 4th round. But even then, when you have the 2 running backs that the Falcons have, to have Devontae Freeman as the starter, and then to have a backup as strong as they do, it's no wonder that the Falcons didn't put Teron Ward as a priority, because he's just not going to get the kind of snaps that warrant paying a guy decent money. But it is worth noting that Tevin Coleman won't be back. Dimitroff keeps saying over and over and over again, maybe we can bring him back. I know they'd like to bring him back, but I just don't think financially it's going to be possible. So Ito Smith, he's going to have to really learn this year from Freeman and from Tevin Coleman, and hopefully he'll be ready to go in his 2nd year. At wide receiver, Taylor Gabriel is out. There's his numbers once again. But Calvin Ridley is in. That's huge. I am so excited about Calvin Ridley. I assumed that they were going to pick a defensive tackle, the guy from Florida, actually. They end up getting taken by Jacksonville, but they didn't. So they drafted Calvin Ridley. I'm totally fine with it. I am a little concerned about defensive tackle, but for whatever reason, I guess the Falcons just decided that it was more important to bring in some help on the offense. So that's fine. Calvin Ridley is going to be a huge player. He's polished. He's ready to go. He's a little bit older than a lot of the other guys, in the draft. I think he's already like 24, but or something like that. But he's ready to go. He can step in right away. He's a polished route runner. Played at Alabama. I think he's going to be huge. I think he'll replace Mohamed Sanu as the number 2 wide receiver. So big expectations from Calvin Ridley. To have those 3 guys, to have Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley probably playing on the outside with having Mohamed Sanu in the slot. And then Devontae Freeman and Telvin Coleman. How are you going to, an Austin Hooper? How are defenses going to stop us? Everything is going to depend on Steve Sarkisian, really. And maybe the offensive line. At tight end, Levine Toilolo is out, but they brought in Logan Paulson to replace him as the blocking tight end. So not a huge upgrade or downgrade there. Brandon Fusco was brought in to potentially be the starter, although apparently Wes Schweitzer is still getting a lot of reps, first-team reps, but presumably you'd think that Brandon Fusco is going to win that job, and he'll play opposite of Andy Levitre. That will improve that guard spot, because Schweitzer didn't play bad last year, but he didn't play exceptionally great either. So if Levitre is healthy and Fusco comes in, and then have Mack in the middle, and they got the 2 tackles, Jake Matthews, and I think Falcons should be solid on offense. On defense, Adrian Claiborne is out. That's a loss for sure. But like I said, the Falcons do have someone waiting in the wings to take that spot. Last year, they took a defensive end in the first round from UCLA. Everybody remembers that famous draft slip when Takkarist McKinley was super excited and was thanking his grandmother and, accidentally cursed on live TV. So, to have Takkarist McKinley to be able to come in, it really helps soften the blow of losing Adrian Claiborne for sure. And it's exciting. It'll be exciting to have Vic Beasley back at full-time defensive end, and then McKinley on the opposite side. Brooks Reed will probably play an early rundown. Falcons should have a good defensive line. Very good defensive line. But Dontari Poe is gone as a starter. And then Reuben is gone as a backup, as well as Courtney Upshaw and Joe Villano. So a lot of depth gone at defensive tackle, and most of all, Dontari Poe gone as a starter. That's a big loss, honestly, for the Falcons. Who do they bring in to try to, replace those guys? Well, they brought in Terrell McClain. Now you can see in 2016 with the Cowboys, who play a 4-3, he had 40 tackles and 2.5 sacks. Last year he played with the Redskins, who play a 3-4, and his numbers drop off significantly to 20 tackles and 2 sacks in 12 games. So, I don't know. People were kind of surprised the Redskins signed McClain and promptly let him go after 1 year. We'll see. They got him really cheap. I think they got him $1.5 million cap hit plus incentives. Maybe he'll make about $4 million if he hits the numbers. I don't know. I'm really pulling for McClain. I hope that he can step in next to Grady Jarrett and help get the job done. There's also DeAndre Sanat. He was drafted in the 3rd round out of USF. I'm very, 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 very curious why they passed on Harrison Phillips. Harrison Phillips had dropped all the way into the 3rd round. Some people thought he was even 1st-round talent or at least 2nd-round talent. The guy had like 1,000,000 tackles at Stanford. I'm very, very curious what it was about Sanat that made them think that he would be a better prospect than Harrison Phillips. But, so that's how the Falcons are going to try to replace the losses at defensive tackle. And that's a position to keep your eye on to see how it works out. The Falcons also have a couple of other players that might be able to contribute at defensive tackle, particularly on passing downs. So we will see. They have Jack Crawford, who's going to be coming back from an injury. We'll see. At linebacker, they drafted an Ivy Leaguer. Okay? It's Foyesade Olokun. And 6th round, all the news from camp has been that he has played very well. He's got the athletic ability, he's got the intelligence. The reason he dropped down to the 6th round is because he's never played against strong talent, being an Ivy League guy. So we'll have to see how does that work out for the Falcons. But I'm excited. I think it's a really good addition. Some people think he's going to compete with Riley, Duke Riley, for that weak side linebacker spot. So we'll see. We'll see how he does. But I'm excited about that pick. Cornerback, brought in Isaiah Oliver in the 2nd round. That's huge. I mean, that may end up getting Robert Alford moved into the slot position in nickel situations, and have Isaiah Oliver on the outside across from Trufant, and then have Robert Alford slip into the inside. Huge signing, tall corner, extremely long arms. Showed up looking great in training camp. That's exciting. Justin Bethel, they brought him in as a number 3 corner. He was a number 3 corner. He will not be the number 3 corner in Atlanta. I don't think, hopefully he'll never see the field at corner, but he's a special team standout. And so that's why they brought in Bethel. And then Leon McFadden was a reserve player last year. So Falcons really even improved at corner, and they already had strong corners. They already had Trufant, Alford, and then Brian Poole. And if Brian Poole ends up as the dime corner coming off the bench, if someone gets hurt, that's solid. I mean, the Vikings probably have even better corners than the Falcons do. They got Xavier Rhodes and a couple other, 2 or 3 other really strong guys. They drafted a guy in the 1st round this year. But other than the Vikings, there's very few teams that are going to have anywhere near as good of a secondary as the Falcons. Which brings us to safety. They also brought in Ron Parker, who was a really good player for the Chiefs for many, many years. Last year he had 67 tackles and 4 passes defended. Traditionally he was a kind of a double-digit pass defended guy. Last year dropped down to 4, but was still a strong player. And they also brought in Terrence Parks. So overall, I mean, there's just maybe starting defensive tackle, the Falcons, dropped off from Dontari Poe. But other than that, the Falcons did not, really experience any drop-off at any position this offseason. And they improved at starting guard. They improved at wide receiver. They improved at cornerback. So these are some key positions and key holes. I mean, cornerback wasn't even a hole. They just took a strength and made it stronger. But they were a little weak on the interior offensive line at guard. They fixed that. They were, I don't want to say they were certainly not weak at wide receiver, but they could have used another weapon on offense. The Falcons are going to be tough. The Falcons are going to be tough this season. And they are one of about 5 teams that have the best chance of winning the conference. I'm telling you right now, write it down. It's the Eagles, the Vikings, the Falcons, the Saints, and the Rams. Those are the 5 teams that have the best chance of winning the NFC. If you like this video, particularly you Falcons fans, please click subscribe, because we are going to have some of the best coverage of the entire NFL on YouTube. At the end of the preseason, we're going to break down the final rosters of all 32 teams. And then each week, we're going to preview the upcoming week's games. And then we'll review the previous week's games. So we'll preview the upcoming week's games and review the previous week's games. It's going to be huge. You do not want to miss it. We are going to give you some of the best information about the NFL on YouTube. Thank you so much.